That's okay.
Yeah.
This is episode 570 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, we are T minus 1 week from our lives, liberty, and property no longer being safe due to the legislature coming back into session for 30 days here in New Mexico. But there's a few things going on and that went on last week that I want to talk about beforehand. But we're going to spend some time outlining some legislative issues that the Rio Grande Foundation will be dealing with. But first, as we have always been at recent months talking about EVs, electric vehicles, and their mandates. Last Wednesday, the Construction Industries Division, a regulatory agency here in New Mexico, had a public hearing about Michelle Lujan Grisham's attempts to foist EV charging stations on new construction, both commercial and residential, here in New Mexico. And the Rio Grande Foundation naturally was there front and center testifying against it. We delivered 750 petitions signed by New Mexicans who expressed opposition to these mandates. And, the hearing was attended by a lot of folks. The decision has not come down yet. In fact, there is a construction industries commission, and we will be actively working to push back against this proposal. Maybe we can't defeat it, but I will say that when it comes to the EV charger mandates, 5% mandates new parking spots for chargers, 15% of the rest of the spots being EV charger ready, other requirements for residential. We're going to see if we can push back by getting a requirement that applies to major counties in New Mexico. And interestingly enough, the three biggest counties in New Mexico population-wise are Santa Fe, Bernalillo, and Doñana County. And those three, if it applies there to the people who vote for this kind of garbage, unfortunately, I do live in Bernalillo County, so that's just a reality. But I would be I think it would be justice if it applied on a limited geographical basis. We'll see what we can do, but we thank all the people who went to keepyourcarsinm.com and provided a signature against it. Of course, this was coming right after the holidays. A lot of people not focusing on these kinds of policy issues, and we'll update you as soon as we find out what the Construction Industries Commission itself decides. But, Michelle Lujan Grisham has a full frontal attack on the gas-powered vehicle and the foisting of EVs on New Mexicans. And we've done our best, and I think we've fought a pretty good fight against her on these unelected bodies. Soon to come to Santa Fe, though, in terms of more regulations and more subsidies.
Yeah, to start off with the incentive approach, tax credits and all that is not working as intended, at least with regard to the pace of change. And so we'll see what if you can incentivize something, we'll see what happens if you try to mandate something. But and not to put too fine a point on it, but we're seeing around the world, not just in the United States, a slowdown and a reduction in electric vehicles. Places as disparate as New Mexico or England are both having a slowdown in the rate of adoption because a lot of factors. And one of the big factors is that infrastructure not being there, and electric vehicles just having while they're fantastic for certain applications, not being good for others. And we'll see what happens when it comes to the government trying to force this further and more quickly than it's happening already.
And additional kind of EV data points. We have been on a IPRA spree as we concluded the year 2023 and into 2024, starting out with New Mexico's Institutes of Higher Learning and their EV stations or lack thereof. Now, it's worth noting that a level 3 charging station is the most expensive and speediest. Within an hour or so, it can charge a vehicle. Level 2 takes anywhere 3 4 hours, from what I understand. And level 1 takes essentially overnight. It's mostly useful for in-home charging where you have 8 hours of sleep and charging the vehicle overnight. But at Western New Mexico University in Silver City, they are going to soon be installing level 3 charging stations, 4 of them to be exact, at a price per station just in excess of $100,000 per unit. We've discussed level 2 stations being installed at C&M right here in Albuquerque for $45,000 per unit. Level 1 station at Highlands cost $11,000 per unit. So those are real world figures of public institutions. A few quick notes. One is that Western New Mexico got some help from Freeport McMoran, which, as a copper miner, they're probably pro EVs at their heart. So they put up some money for it. And I know you're a Silver City guy, so
Yes,
you've got
sir.
some thoughts on that. And also, your alma mater there, New Mexico State, has no EV charging units whatsoever at any of their campuses. Because, of course, when we request this information, we're not just referring to main campus for whatever institution. We're also referring to or asking for branch campus information because you have Doña Ana Community College, and I believe that's still considered a branch of New Mexico State. And there's a couple of branches of New Mexico State across the
Mhm.
state, as there are of most institutes of higher learning, because that's the way things work in New Mexico.
Right.
Separate issue. EVs, though, Western New Mexico University installing the Cadillac of EV charging units.
But it's only one,
No, it's
right?
four.
Oh, four. Okay,
400,
four.
a little over 400,000 for those things.
Yeah, and it is interesting. It's like the level 3, the fast charge. Pretty useful. The other thing that Paul, when a lot of public entities early on started to do level 1 and 2 chargers, a lot of them wouldn't charge for it. So if you went up to a hospital that has it that wouldn't charge, you have a level 3 and somebody's charging, your electric bill, you're going to notice that. So that's just something else. And with regard to Freeport McMoran, I know they're a big supporter of Western New Mexico being active mining company in Southwest New Mexico. And yeah, I have a feeling that the copper miners definitely like electric vehicles because the statistics I've seen show that they have more copper in them than a traditional automobile. And 30 years ago, as plastics replaced metals in a lot of automobile production and a lot of pieces and parts, that it really caused some hard times for the copper industry. So I would have a feeling that if you're a copper miner or a miner of any kind right now, electric vehicles are looking mighty good. Now, when we talk about where those mines are built and whether we are allowed to build new ones and how that all works out, that's a totally separate story. But very interesting. And, I just want to say that electricity is not free. And so we've acted like it was. That's been one of the subsidies, is a lot of free charging stations. I have a feeling that that will tremendously wane in the not too distant future, to the extent there still are free charging stations around.
Yeah, and with the upcoming legislative session, the governor has put forth proposals for subsidies for EV charging stations, and we'll get into that a little bit later on, maybe next week's program, as we really take a deep dive into uh, the legislative session. For now, we'll just say that that will be the next battle to be waged on EV charging and EV subsidies and mandates. There's been a few bills posted at the at the website, the legislative website, pre-filed pieces of legislation. But you can bet that we'll be watching and checking out what those bills relating to electric vehicles look like. The governor, of course, I mean, anybody, it's kind of like that Geico commercial. Even a caveman can do it. The governor, very adept or aggressive at wielding her executive power through these agencies and boards that she nominates, like the Environmental Improvement Board and the Construction Industries Division. Not so effective at getting things done through even a pretty darn friendly legislature. She's not attempted a lot with regard to EVs, although the legislators did pass a tax package that contained some subsidies for EVs and charging stations that the governor subsequently vetoed. So there's that from last year, but I suspect that she will at least have a little bit tougher time imposing her will on the legislature. Obviously, there's a lot of money available. They can throw her a lifeline, if you will, or just kind of make a statement of we're not going to go for your preferred policies. So that's not actually at the top of our agenda for this upcoming session. I would say that the biggest issue we're looking at is paid family leave and fighting against yet another mandate on business in New Mexico. Just so happens, not surprisingly, that this is the top priority of the progressive left wing in New Mexico. You probably heard some talk about it, probably seen some op-eds about it if you read New Mexico's newspapers or see them on social media. Last year, the bill was SB 11 by Mimi Stewart, State Senator Stewart, one of the arch progressive leftists in New Mexico. The bill passed the Senate and was narrowly killed in the House. As currently proposed, because my understanding is that the interest groups are going to push for the same basic bill. There's not going to be any changes, no wiggle room. The paid leave legislation, as formulated, would require employees to pay $5 for every 1,000 of income, and employers with 5 or more employees to pay $4 for every 1,000 into a paid family leave trust fund administered through the Department of Workforce Solutions. So this is a tax increase both on employers and employees. You can't avoid that. That is an absolute fact. You would have employees able to take that leave and not receive their entire salary, but at a percentage of it. Last year, the fiscal impact report cited potential fund insolvency risk. And I know this is a surprise to absolutely no one listening to this, but government not only has a tremendous difficulty predicting demand for these kinds of government freebies, but they have a very strong incentive to under count for the needed money, the needed tax increase, because they, of course, want to get this policy in place, and then we'll figure out the details later. So the legislature's internal analysts said this thing could be insolvent in short order, and I think that's the number one problem right here, aside from this being a tax increase on businesses and employees here in New Mexico.
Yes, and the LFC didn't get that idea in a vacuum. They ran some of the numbers, and these New Mexico is not early to the game with regard to this paid family leave. There's other states that have had issues with what shall we say, over-promising and under-delivering. And in this case, if you under-deliver, meaning the benefits aren't paid for, then you're going to have to pay for more. And it's interesting. This is a sort of language and that it's relatively easy to take, but will there be enough money to fund it? And is this really the best way to go about doing this? There's no question that there are certain constituencies that would benefit from paid family leave, and let's face it, Paul. What's the best benefit is one that you pay little or nothing for and get a huge benefit. So that is the problem with a lot of these government programs right there. So we'll see what happens. And, I don't know what we need to do to document, but if they put this thing forward exactly as it is, what's the chances of it requiring either benefit reductions or future tax increases or a combination? I'll give you my guess, very, very, very high. So we'll see if this thing can make it through this time. And if it does, we will follow the bouncing ball to insolvency for the fund.
Well, of course, you have federal programs like Social Security and
That
Medicare.
has a Social Security
Oh,
lockbox.
that lockbox, it's so secure. So
Yes.
secure. Those are two of the big ones, but of course, New Mexico and pick a state almost, all of them have major pension issues with their government employee pensions. I think it's pretty much an iron rule of government that setting up some kind of fund like this and saying, "Oh no, it's off limits, it's off limits." This is like, I'm sorry to say, the fat kid, and maybe they put like a little lock on the box of donuts. The box of donuts inevitably gets opened up, and they just can't help themselves because this is the way our political classes operate. So even if they have the best of intentions, which I firmly do not believe, I've been around New Mexico politics long enough and lived through COVID. I do not believe our political leaders have the best of intentions at all. And I think we can expect this policy to do significant harm. However, with all of that being said, Wally, if this is truly a policy goal for New Mexico's legislature, we have this little thing called $3.4 billion in a surplus account. Most of that money is being flushed down the toilet anyway. So if we're going to set up a new government benefit called paid leave, I would think that the legislature could find some of this money. And I mean, I don't like the permanent funds. I don't like these government funds, but there is more than enough money in this budget surplus, largely thanks to oil and gas, to put some money aside to not make New Mexico a more business unfriendly state, a state that's worse to work in and have a job in than it was before the legislature came into session. Use the oil and gas surplus, use this surplus money to fund this kind of program. There is absolutely no justification for raising taxes on New Mexicans this session.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Is basically $1 billion ante into that fund to allow it to get going. The other thing, some other states have done, Paul, is they've just put this paid family leave just on the employees, not on the employer and the employees. Well, New Mexico. Notwithstanding the fact that we're not growing as a state and our economy is only strong from the standpoint of oil and gas, seems to forget that, yeah, taxing businesses more is not a zero sum game. It causes definite negative long term structural deficits that the legislature and the political class in New Mexico says we want to diversify our economy, but then when it comes to things that might actually assist in diversification, it's amazing how often they do things that just go in the exact opposite direction.
Yes, and one more item you will hear, as I did recently, that this is good for employees. This is going to help employers retain and attract people, and blah and blah and blah. Uh, and maybe that's true. Maybe. I have my doubts because government regulations generally don't have that impact. The states that tend to be more attractive to people that people are moving to are not the kind of states that have all of these rules and regulations. But I'll just give them the benefit of the doubt because that's the kind of guy I am. if that is the case, then maybe those employers would be the kind of people who would allow those policies, and that people would go to the employers that have those policies in place. I know it's shocking. Free will amongst the working class of people, as well as the employer class of people who want to attract good workers. And maybe this kind of policy is attractive to enough of those workers that it makes sense for certain employers to do. Certainly, government has generous pay and leave policies in place, and New Mexico's got enough government jobs for two states our size. So uh, you would think that maybe they would have just a touch of faith in the employers and employees to come to this agreement themselves, rather than having to foist it on everybody through yet another. I know I'm a broken record. You could add this to the bingo card: one size fits all public policy.
No, and that's a good point, Paul. You know, a lot of larger businesses offer enhanced long term disability insurance that is part of your benefit package that you can elect to pay for. And if that's something that has value to you, and so could something like that be put together that you could opt into some sort of insured plan? But the key about true insurance, as opposed to I don't know, uh, trying to be insurance, which is what the government does a lot of times. True insurance, the amount of money going in has to be equal long term to the money going out. And as we said, one of the biggest concerns of this right off the bat is that the benefits will be higher than the amount of revenue that's collected from businesses' employees to support this.
All right. Well, we mentioned the budget surplus, and there have been some proposals made regarding spending in New Mexico, regarding that surplus. And again, it is always worth noting that the doom and gloom crowd keeps saying year after year that the amount of money is going to dry up, that's going to slow down, that New Mexico is going to not have the amount of money available in the future. And this is a dynamic world. We could always see a global economic depression. We could always see other issues regarding the oil and gas industry. Of course, prices are somewhat down from where they were when we were at $120, $130 a barrel. It's closer to $70 a barrel now. That means less revenue coming into the state of New Mexico. And it is also worth noting that as government grows and expands, those surpluses have to continually grow in order to keep up, because if say oil and gas generates uh, $10 million, $10 billion, I should say, and government grows from 15 billion to 17 billion to 18 billion, the surplus revenue available is automatically going to be lower unless you see continued growth in the oil and gas revenue. So the fact is that yet again we have mind-blowing amounts of money available to New Mexico's politicians as they enter the legislative session. $3.4 billion. As we saw, as this 30-day session gets ready to kick off, proposals come out from the governor and the Legislative Finance Committee as to what to do with some of those dollars. Now, uh, the LFC is obviously under the control of the Democratic legislature. We've had a lot of nice things to say over the past year. I think 2023, if you kind of summarize the theme of the podcast we've had, it might be the Legislative Finance Committee really getting it right with a lot of the policies that we've been talking about. Uh, this isn't so much the case, but they have a big difference. First time I've ever seen
Yeah.
between 5.9% spending at the LFC increase and a 10% increase coming from the governor. Before we dive into a little more of the facts and figures, uh, this does seem, even though, I have to say uh, I'm sure there were some very interesting conversations, and I simply do not have the time or resources at the Rio Grande Foundation to attend all of these interim meetings. But I do think it would have been fascinating to be in the room with those folks at the LFC, because obviously you have folks like George Munoz, who I think is part of the coalition of the sane in the legislature, whereas you have a lot of folks out there that are to the left. And it would have been interesting to see what policies they discussed and considered. But definitely a 4% differential essentially between the governor and the LFC, the legislature's proposal, is a significant difference. What do you think?
Well, when you're governor, you're only going to be governor for the rest of your term. And what happens after that is not your problem. And if you're a legislator and, heaven forbid, there's been legislators that have seen the ups and downs of oil and gas, of other revenues, of the state, of inflation. And they know if you grow government too big, at the end of the day, what are we going to do? We're either going to cut government, and man, is that tough to do. It's tough to do anywhere, but in New Mexico, that's proven exceedingly difficult to do. And then what is your only other option is to raise taxes. And a lot of times the problem comes is that uh, you need to raise taxes when your economy isn't doing as well. That's why you have the deficit in the first place. And so um, I will say that I think the legislature is taking at least those whose what shall we say, direction of the LFC is starting to kind of coalesce together. They're taking a little bit more of a long term approach to it than the governor's office, which is, oh, I'll make a splash. By the time if this comes back to be negative, I'll be out of here anyway, and it'll be somebody else's problem to deal with. And the other thing that a state like New Mexico is, I think, particularly vulnerable with that situation where what happens at some point in the future if the oil, and it's not if, it's when, but when could be a long time too. When there aren't as many oil and gas revenues, and you really do need more revenue, you can find yourself in the death spiral where you raise taxes, it slows business down. So you raise them more, it slows business down. And Paul, is there a couple states to the west of us that people thought could never, suffer economic downturns, but they've added enough regulation and taxes to the state, and I'm talking about California, that even, the fair haired economic child, the dream economy of the United States has proven that you can do a lot of damage. Well, let me just say, other than the oil and gas industry, the economic environment for business and the about number and growth trajectory of businesses in New Mexico is nothing like California has been ever. So we're particularly vulnerable here.
Yeah. So let's further talk about this budget situation where, last year we had a tax omnibus package, $3.6 billion surplus, 60-day session. I get it. There were at least some significant changes considered in that omnibus package to New Mexico's tax structure. Before the session, the governor talked about GRT reform, or at least tacitly endorsed it. Uh, this is a 30-day session, which theoretically, and 30 days is plenty of time to come up with some tax reforms if you have the political will, interest, and appetite for it. If I may kind of read some tea leaves, and this is not exactly conspiracy theory stuff, but uh, after having, this is like a high school kid writing a 37, let's just say 37-page paper. That's 37 provisions in the omnibus tax bill last year. And the governor came in and basically just went with a big red marker, eat,
Yeah.
eat the whole thing, except for 4 provisions. It seems to me that there may not be much agreement on taxes across the board, to deal with at a large level tax reform, tax reduction, or some tax increases. Thank God. Uh, However, I do know there will be some tax increases pushed in this session, not just the paid family leave issue, but also alcohol
Yeah,
excise
they're
taxes.
going after alcohol, and they
Right.
did last time, and were unsuccessful.
Well, they
But
kind of had an oopsie
yeah,
because they got I believe, the ounces versus liters or
they
something.
didn't do the math,
Yeah.
Paul. Heaven forbid.
New Mexico's education system rears its ugly head once again. But I think one of the big things we're looking at, and again, last session, that tax bill was very, very ugly. We praised, sort of, kind of, the governor for vetoing corporate tax increases, capital gains tax increases. Now the legislature ultimately did not pass income tax increases. There was also, as we mentioned, alcohol and tobacco tax increases. Those are
Right.
evergreen in New Mexico, given the current makeup of the legislature. And we'll talk about those at a later date. But uh, no love. There were rebates passed in the last session. Nobody's talking about rebates right now.
No, Paul, and the quick math: 3 billion divided by 2 million, approximate amount of money that probably doesn't need to be spent on state government divided by the number of citizens in New Mexico. $1,500 for every man, woman, and child in New Mexico. That would be that would be good to have that be House Bill, whatever. You got to do one to get the funding. House Bill 2, Senate Bill 2. Let's give that part back and then work on spending well the rest of the big budget here in New Mexico.
Yeah, hopefully Republicans will at least introduce those bills, and those would be inherently germane. At least
Yeah,
they may get
because it's
killed in the first
budgetary.
committee, but
Yep.
that doing something to give taxpayers a seat at the table, because what we'll see in this session, this is not Nostradamus level prognosticating here. This is pretty simple stuff. We will see government get a massive spending increase. The governor wants 10%. We will see uh, money put aside for so called future rainy days, which I philosophically have a problem with on two fronts. One is that government doesn't need, if you and I put money away for our retirement, that is good, sound policy for us as
Mm-hmm.
individuals. But government does not need money put away because the government never retires. The government's always going to be around.
Right.
Yes, there will be darker days economically that will come about, but that's when government needs to shrink back and do a little bit less spending and taxing for New Mexicans. Right now, we need more of that money returned to New Mexicans, rebates being the second best option, tax reform being the top option. But we're not getting any of that at all in this upcoming legislative session, at least as these budgets currently are put forth. So, real quickly, to cite some numbers, back in when she took office in 2018, the FY 2019 budget was just a mere $6.3 billion.
Okay.
We are here if the governor's budget is accepted at $10.5 billion. Yes, there's been a little inflation, but that is 66.67% growth, 9% annually over those years. So, well beyond inflation and population growth, well beyond any rational amount of spending increases. So, uh, this just is par for the course. And yeah, it's not just about the spending. The spending is definitely a problem. Ultimately, though, a vast majority of this money is being put aside, locked away in government. We don't need more money locked away in government. We need more money, uh, and specifically better tax policy for New Mexicans, whether that's individuals paying lower taxes or businesses paying lower and better articulated taxes, especially as far as the GRT is concerned.
Yeah, when you look at Paul, the the function of government, what are some of the things that would justify or be good if spending any money on is, New Mexico they have a crime problem. We don't talk about much about that, and we occasionally throw little more money at it, but jurisdictions across the state are having a tough time even attracting police force. We have our education challenges, where the amount of money has gone up dramatically over the past couple of decades, and relative to every other state in the union, we are not doing too well, and there's very little talk about that. That's nothing we want to talk about. And then there's the business climate. Again, we give a little bit of lip service to that, but man, a little reform of the gross receipts tax done in such a way that actually businesses had some confidence that that wasn't going to be completely undone in a very near subsequent session might, heaven forbid, actually do something to encourage more economic growth outside of the oil and gas sector. But those aren't the things we talk about. We're talking about electric vehicle charging stations and a lot of things like that. And then, tax on alcohol, paid family leave. Not saying that those don't have, they're things we can talk about, but it seems like we are, to coin a phrase from an old colleague, we are majoring in minors. So we're looking at a lot of weird, off the mainstream policies as being really, really important, and not looking at really what the underlying things that make for a successful state are.
Yeah, you got it. It's frustrating because uh, I think the legislature is, it's not like they require much in the way of being talked into not reforming some basic tax structural issues and reducing tax burdens. Uh, a vast majority of the legislature, and certainly this governor, are people who philosophically believes that government deserves and should take 100% of our production, and anything that we are allowed to keep is, it's just thanks to the benevolence of the government policymakers. Um, but that's obviously a bad, unsound economic model, and it's not going to help New Mexico achieve, improvements to its poverty numbers. It's not going to enable economic diversification. It's not going to make New Mexico a more attractive place to live, to work, to do business, et cetera, et cetera. So uh, we shall see where this all goes in this upcoming session. But uh, the PNM merger fell through. And this is another one that does impact kind of New Mexico's business friendliness. Now, I will say at the outset that the Rio Grande Foundation did not take a position on either side, but I know you're very familiar with PNM and this merger, so I definitely want to get your take. But here are a short list of my pros and cons, and they, I think, explain a little bit of why RGF did not engage. We do take philosophically what I would call clear shots. We like to take on policies because there are so many of those policies that clearly are good or bad for New Mexico and its economy. The PNM Avangrid merger was not one of those clear shots. But here we go. Pros, why the merger would have been a good thing. Given the push for so called renewable energy and the energy transition, Avangrid, a international company with expertise in the field, is likely better equipped to handle the transition. Now, we can take issue with the transition. That's the Energy Transition Act, which we have consistently spoken out against. But that was not a part of this merger per se. Having an outside company invest in New Mexico represents a vote of confidence for the state's economy and the ability to make money for investors, even in a heavily regulated sector in a state that is not known for being business friendly, i.e., New Mexico. On the opposing side, why the merger would have been negative for New Mexico. There were stipulations within the agreement that would have been nothing more than giveaways to various special interest groups. Inevitably, those would come at taxpayer expense. And PNM will continue to be, because the merger fell through, headquartered and run locally with a primary focus on New Mexico. So, kind of uh, and yes, there were promises made, but inevitably down the road, you have corporations that consolidate, and they may keep a New Mexico office open, but the power structure would shift very quickly in a company run. It doesn't matter if it's Spain or Texas, the power structure and the interest shift away from a New Mexico focus throughout the corporation to a broader focus of all their different holdings. That's just a fundamental fact of life. So, your take on those issues, your take on the merger itself falling through, go at it, Wally.
Yeah, well, one of the things is that PNM isn't just in New Mexico; they're in Texas. And one of the things that happened when they acquired that Texas utility, we're still, they're still a quote unquote New Mexico headquartered organization, but there's this little thing in big companies that's called shared services. The accounting and HR and all that. Uh, a lot of that has moved to Texas, and not just recently, Paul. A long, long time ago, P&M used to have a lot of administrative offices downtown, and they don't have those to the point that they were able to get rid of one of their large buildings, and now a lot of that is in the Fort Worth, Texas area being done, and so. I think that what would be left in New Mexico with a big merger of Avangrid or anyone else is a bare minimum of anything other than the people who are out there on the street, working on the electric lines and doing that. From a large point of view, is this and you said something that's very important is given the given the move of to low carbon, getting rid of coal, moving to renewables, all of that. Given that, is PNM going to struggle going forward without a larger partner? And let me just back up a little. And the electric regulatory process, in my experience, has been the one that's ostensibly an economic and legal process. It's economics is the driver, and economics obviously includes technology and all of the financial things done in a very legal. But in a practical world, it ends up being very much an accounting process. So, what's the accounting say? And then in legal, it gets transferred to political very, very quickly. A lot of the things that are, quote, legal decisions end up being political. And let's just look back a few years ago. New Mexico put the Energy Transition Act in, has very aggressive targets. And so PNM and Avangrid were relying on that as the backdrop strategically for them to go forward. But lo and behold, the politics really, in my opinion, is what got this merger canceled. And a couple of things. One is that right in the middle of this, we move from an elected commission to an appointed commission. And so the elected commissioners did not necessarily go along with the big strategic plan that the governor and those that passed the Energy Transition Act wanted, and that was the PNM merger. And so then now here we are with an appointed commission, but a whole huge record and a whole lot of things that have gone on in the regulatory process that aren't going to be clearly undone. And then some give a lot of either credit or blame to the new energy economy. What happens a lot of times in any regulatory matter, whether it be a rate case or a merger, there's lots of interveners. And then, as you very accurately said, a lot of times the goal is to not fully litigate these cases in administrative law proceeding, but you come up with settlements. And the way they come up with settlements is It's a little bit like the Oprah Winfrey show. Some money for you, some money for you, some money for you, a policy for you. Well, the new energy economy did not want anything.
Right.
They did not. There was nothing they wanted. There was no way to buy them off.
Well, that's because they want PNM to go out of business.
Yeah, and that, which is ironic. So, the new energy economy a lot of times strikes, and I think they did in this merger case. They strike very, what shall I say? Oh, that's a good one. That is a great point. That is, very strategic points that in some ways I was like, oh yeah, you guys are doing a good job. You're actually reading this stuff and going through and making your case. But as you say, at the end of the day, what would the new energy economy want? I have a feeling there wouldn't even be lights on in New Mexico. We'd have a few battery packs that operated a few hours a day and some windmills and solar panels, and nothing would happen. So, um, is this going to be a good deal for New Mexico? The answer is I sort of think it's going to be a little tough sledding going forward, because it certainly seemed like a lot of things that if PNM knew they were going to be standalone, they would have made more moves with regard to implementing what's going to need to be happening on the Energy Transition Act. And now that they don't have Avangrid to back them up in that, they're going to have to either go back and do those things themselves and attract capital from the capital markets, or find another potential merger candidate. And I will say, I don't think it's impossible. A few people asked me, well, is there any way this Avangrid merger could be put back on the table? I don't think it's impossible, but I have a feeling that given what's gone on with New Mexico, it's not likely. But there are a lot of other utility companies out there that might be willing to take a look at PNM as a merger candidate going forward. But in the end of the day, we need to have the lights on, and it's going to take a ton of capital to make that transition. And done poorly, what's it going to do is going to reduce reliability, meaning the lights are going to flicker and go off, and the price is going to go up dramatically. And hopefully that is not the situation. And then one final point, hey, the Public Regulation Commission, the new one, the new appointed one, they just rejected and scaled back tons of PNM's rate increases. So they are certainly not all in it for PNM. So PNM is they're hurting on several fronts with regard to what their regulatory situation here is in New Mexico.
And we're up against it here, but a couple quick comments on that. One is, having gone through this entire process, because I'm sure Avangrid spent a lot of money just, to go through this process, a lot of time and attention that they could have been doing other things. I'm sure they have a sour taste in their mouth. So the broader narrative of New Mexico being anti-business is not going to be improved by this particular episode. Secondly, as much as we, other people who may philosophically oppose Governor Lujan Grisham and her various schemes might think that there is some kind of broad-based strategy, like she hired PRC commissioners or hired or recruited PRC commissioners that were going to rubber stamp this thing, this merger, that doesn't seem to have been the case. They may have been supporters in some way, shape, or form of this issue, but with the court ruling, with other decisions already in place when the transition happened a year ago to the new PRC, either it was too late or they weren't willing to just go full speed ahead with this merger. So here we are. It'll be interesting to watch what happens next, specifically in the corporate structure of PNM. More importantly for us, in terms of the transition, so-called, to renewable energy and how that takes place, because I agree with you. There were a lot of decisions probably put on hold by PNM, awaiting this merger, and that they kind of wanted to on part of it, it's just good corporate governance to not make big investments and not spend a lot of money when you're in negotiations with a third party that's going to potentially take you over, and other things that happen. And this is happening all at a very pivotal time for PNM, not UNM, and their entire the entire shift in New Mexico's energy portfolio. So, unfortunately, well, go ahead.
Yeah, just
Last word.
one last final point is, there's a lot of balls in the air. There's the Energy Transition Act, there's the change in commission, and then there was a merger. And, it's one of those you say, well, all of those are likely to go the way we want, but they weren't 100%. And just for example, say they were each 75% chance of being perfect. 75% times 75% times 75% is 42%, and that's less than 50. And that doesn't mean that those numbers are right, but the point is that when you have so many moving pieces and parts, to just be able to predict where it's going to go in a linear fashion is it's kind of a bit of a fool's errand. And depending on who you are, you might feel pretty foolish about this, where PNM ended up right now.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.